Welcome back, folks. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, so we're here to continue my crime and punishment analysis. And let's do a little recap. So this is part 2 of a 3-part crime and punishment analysis. So if you haven't seen the first part, I'll link it somewhere in this vicinity. I don't remember which side it's on. In part 1, we discussed Raskolnikov's myth of self-importance and how he uses his theory of egoistic utilitarianism to justify his murder of a moneylender and her sister. Crime and Punishment shows that despite his sins, he's ultimately redeemed by the love and compassion of Sonya, a destitute prostitute whose faith and selflessness serve as a moral compass for Raskolnikov's polluted mind. Sonya, however, is far from the only positive example of morality that Raskolnikov has to follow. Dunya, his sister, bends over backwards to support Raskolnikov and show him the error in his ways. She is so unflinching in her morality and love that she's able to brush aside Raskolnikov's constant egoism and condescension. Where Sonya possesses a certain quiet strength that grows louder as the novel progresses, Dunya, not quite as traumatized as Sonya, though still having to deal with her share of dominating men and shaming women, is more confident and proud in her strength. But the two characters are really far more alike than they are different. Both women are selfless and uncompromising in their morality. Both serve as voices of reason as Raskolnikov skates closer and closer to ruin. Both women see past his evil deeds to a heart corrupted by an arrogant ideology that often grips young men. Not necessarily Raskolnikov's theory, but just arrogance in general. And both stand up to patriarchal dominance and ideals to move to a place of newfound power. But Dunya's character stretches far beyond her relationship with Raskolnikov. Dunya shows boundless strength and moral aptitude in her dealings with sleazy men and the patriarchal women that are complicit in their behavior. It's really quite refreshing to see this kind of a strong female character written in a Russian classic over 300 years ago. We'll review 3 characters in this video: Dunya, Svidrigailov, and Luzhin, and a little bit of Sonya. Luzhin is a wealthy narcissist whose sole focus is increasing his own money and power. He proposes to Dunya because she's poor and has experienced misfortune. Luzhin wants to rescue her. What a good guy. His theory is that Dunya will be so grateful for him saving her from her destitution that she will have to be eternally grateful and submissive to him. And, well, we'll see how that goes. Svidrigailov is more lustful and base in his desire, but he's equally damaging to Dunya's well-being. So let's dissect these characters and see how Dunya stands up to these depraved patriarchs, and how all their stories end with a smug sense of justice. Real quick, just before we get started, I want to say thanks for watching. Appreciate you. If you enjoy the video, I hope you'll consider subscribing so you can see when part 3 comes out, and give me a thumbs up, because 1 like equals 1 respect for Dunya. It's so corny. I'm being ironical, okay?
We meet Dunya by way of her mother's letter to Raskolnikov, in which we learn much about her character and the troubles she's been through recently. Essentially, Dunya took a job as a governess, but ran into a bit of bad luck when the man that she worked for, a hedonistic nihilist named Svidrigailov, shamelessly lusted after her. Svidrigailov's wife discovered these advances and misinterpreted them as Dunya's doing, causing her to be ostracized as a slut and fired. The incident affects her mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, to the point of illness, but Dunya remains strong. Quote, "Duncheka was firmer than I, and if only you could have seen how she bore it all, comforting me and encouraging me. She is an angel." Eventually, Svidrigailov comes clean with the truth And his wife decides to make amends by informing everybody that Dunya was in fact not to blame. Marfa Petrovich is quite an interesting character as well. We don't really have time to get into her, but there's a lot to be said about her complacency in allowing Svidrigailov's lust, and it's neither here nor there, but she's not totally blameless is what I'm getting at. Svidrigailov is, by all accounts, a infinitely more complex and interesting character than Luzhin. In fact, one analysis I watched of Crime and Punishment described Luzhin as one of the very few one-note characters in the Dostoevsky verse. That's just a new little term I invented. Svidrigailov is a man of mystery, lechery, lust, and he has a somewhat playful attitude towards his depravity, as if it were all a big game to him. He's a creature of some disgust, but his misdealings are ultimately played for comedy. Svidrigailov exhibits existential boredom and apathy at life's inherent purposelessness, indicating a certain nihilism mixed with a little bit of whimsy and amusement at the absurdity of existence. Relatable. He leans into the caricature developed from the rumors of his debauchery and licentiousness in what R.E. Richardson describes as, quote, an artificial and theatrical performing self, a kind of self-parody. Svidrigailov says, quote, I'm not particularly interested in anyone's opinion, and therefore why not be a vulgar fellow for a while? The attire is so well suited to our climate, and especially if that is also one's natural inclination. The rumors about Svidrigailov's behavior make him a very interesting character to dissect, because he himself never confirms or denies the validity of these rumors. At one point, he refers to his causing of a child's death as a triviality. He's also rumored to be involved in the death of a serf at his wife's estate, and to have poisoned and killed Marfa Petrovich, his wife. The strongest piece of evidence that Svidrigailov was in fact responsible for these deaths is all of their appearances as apparitions. He says he is often visited by Marfa Petrovich, and he's also seen the serf as a ghost. But to me, the most interesting and somewhat bizarre appearance of one of these ghosts is in his final dream before his death. In this dream, Svidrigailov finds a 5-year-old girl beaten and shivering. He puts her under blankets and leaves her to warm up and sleep. But when he returns, he discovers that the girl is in fact pretending to be asleep. And in a very strange sequence, the girl wakes up and looks at him somewhat seductively, and Svidrigailov determines that she's in fact a prostitute who is still 5 years old. All the while, she's just laughing at him and reaching for him. I think it's pretty safe to assume that this chilling nightmare is supposed to represent Svidrigailov's perverse lust for very young girls. But one can also infer that the girl is meant to be the final ghost of his victims. He's being haunted by all the women whose deaths he's implicated in. It's not any coincidence, by the way, that these are all women. I think this is sort of a hint that Svidrigailov is supposed to represent this male-dominated culture. Critics have debated at length about whether Svidrigailov is supposed to be an evil, vile man, a representation of immorality, or a somewhat neutral character who just uses people as playthings, entertaining himself with their gossip and reactions to him. Two things, though, cannot be denied: his hedonistic lust and his patriarchal domination of women. As this analysis is in relation to Dunya, we're going to focus mostly on the latter, though we'll draw certain conclusions from aspects of his story not related to Dunya. We can start with a few key details that Svidrigailov reveals in conversation with Raskolnikov. He talks of him whipping Marfa Petrovich, his wife, for insubordination 3 times during their marriage, though he does deny that these were regular, somewhat sadistic beatings. Of course, we do have to keep in mind that this sort of behavior was not as much of a big deal during the time of Crime and Punishment's writing. though it is still seen in the text as unsavory. Next, we have the way that he talks about women as objects for his own pleasure rather than as human beings. Quote, "Am I a monster or a victim myself? Well, and what if I am a victim? For in offering to elope with my object, Dunya, to America or Switzerland, I may have been nurturing the most respectful feelings, and hoping, besides, to arrange for our mutual happiness." Aw, what a nice guy. Svidrigailov also defines all women by the ease in which they succumb to pity and flattery. He describes these as tools for manipulation and seduction, claiming that they have, quote, "never yet failed anyone," though he is in fact proven wrong with Dunya's ultimate rejection. Then, of course, and perhaps most damning, is his lust for very young girls. He speaks of them in a way that makes the reader squeamish. I'm even getting squeamish just thinking about it. And at one point, he refers to his soon-to-be bride, who is also soon-to-be 16, quote, "She's still in a short dress, an unopened bud. She blushes, turns pink as the dawn. I don't know how you feel about women's faces, but to my mind, those 16 years, those still childish eyes, that timidity, those bashful little tears, to my mind, they're better than beauty. And on top of all that, she's just like a picture. Fair hair fluffed up in little curls like a lamb's. Plump little crimson lips. Little feet. Lovely." Ugh. Gross. Svidrigailov, dude. You gotta see a therapist, bro. The argument for Svidrigailov as a neutral, whimsical character is, in my opinion, quite thin. One of the main tenets is that he never acts on his desire for his 15-year-old bride, and in fact leaves her 15,000 rubles before his death. I suppose if you want to make that conclusion, then fine. But what one cannot deny is the very real threat of physical violence against Dunya. Much of Dunya and Svidrigailov's relationship is left open to interpretation, with Dunya saying that, quote, "He is a horrible man. I can't imagine worse," while Svidrigailov implies that there's more to their relationship than the reader is aware. He says to her, quote, "You've obviously forgotten how, in the heat of propaganda, you were already inclining and melting. I saw it in your dear eyes. Remember, in the evening, in the moonlight, and with the nightingale singing?" Dunya replies that he's lying, and I'm inclined to believe her in this. Also, what Svidrigailov assumes of their previous relationship is very possible that he just misinterpreted her looks. I mean, like, he was her boss. We can pretty much chalk it up to him reading too much into her just being polite. Yeah, that's not a very uncommon tendency for men. So that's what I'm going to go with, but, you know, think what you want. But also, we can just look at their final interaction and see the way that he treats her, and you can draw your own conclusions from this. So here, Svidrigailov, claiming to have evidence of Raskolnikov's murder, blackmails Dunya into meeting with him. Dunya, in her fear for her brother, which outweighs her hesitance, follows Svidrigailov to his room, at which point Svidrigailov locks the door and pockets the key, and professes his infinite love for Dunya. Quote, "Let me kiss the hem of your dress. Let me. I can't bear its rustling. Tell me, do this, and I'll do it. I'll do anything. I'll do the impossible." Svidrigailov raves with lust, warns Dunya in a soft voice that comes across more as sinister that all the neighbors are not home, and her banging on the door and yelling won't do a damn thing. Dunya then pulls out a revolver. After multiple warnings, she fires a shot that misses and grazes his head. She shoots again, but the gun misfires, and at this point, she throws away the gun. Even when her physical safety is threatened, she can't bring herself to kill, unlike Raskolnikov. She is completely at the mercy of Svidrigailov, who moves in and puts an arm around her waist. The threat of physical violence is ever present, and Dunya implores one last time to be let go, at which point Svidrigailov asks if she does not love him and can't, ever. To which Dunya replies, never. Finally, he gives her the keys and lets her leave. And as he watches her go, quote, a strange smile twisted his face. A pitiful, sad, weak smile. A smile of despair. In the end, Svidrigailov doesn't technically harm her or force himself on her physically. Nevertheless, the threat of violence was to be his weapon in this situation, when his seduction tricks of pity and flattery did not work. This, in my opinion, is a form of rape, because it doesn't leave any option for consent. Either the woman says no, at which point the man might resort to physical violence anyways, or she submits in hopes of retaining a shred of dignity. Either way, the decision is not hers, and emotional trauma is inflicted. So no, I don't really buy the whole Svidrigailov as a neutral character argument. He uses his patriarchal position of power as a weapon, and when he doesn't get what he wants, he resorts to escalating acts of terror and coercion. He has no interests, no love, and he recognizes himself to be depraved, infected with a disease like lust. And so, following Dunya's rejection, he gives in fully to his apathy and nihilism and commits suicide. Remember that letter way back when that introduced us to Dunya and Svidrigailov? Well, it also introduced another key character, Luzhin. We learned that Luzhin has proposed to Dunya, and while he's not as shameless and lustful as Svidrigailov, equally contemptible are his strange and somewhat vile reasons for proposing. It's revealed later that he has a savior complex and wishes to rescue, quote, a well-behaved and poor girl. She must be poor. Very young, very pretty, well-born and educated, very intimidating, who had experienced a great many misfortunes and was utterly cowed before him. A girl who would all her life regard him as her salvation, stand in awe of him, over him, wonder at him and him alone. Wow, Luzhin, quite a wish list you got there. Well, he thinks that he's found the perfect girl in Dunya, but he vastly underestimates her, as we'll see. All of this is revealed to Raskolnikov, minus the colorful description of Luzhin that we get later, in the letter from his mother. And he infers from other context clues what the true nature of Luzhin's proposal is. He recognizes that Dunya accepted this proposal solely out of self-sacrifice for his own sake. Luzhin is a wealthy and powerful man, and Dunya wishes to secure a job for Raskolnikov, thereby elevating him and the family to a higher social standing. Quote, the thing is clear, for herself, for her own comfort, even to save herself from death, she wouldn't sell herself. No, she's selling herself for someone else. For a dear, beloved person, she will sell herself. That's what our whole catch consists of. For her mother, for her brother, she will sell herself. She'll sell everything. Oh, in that case, given the chance, we'll even crush our moral feeling, our freedom, peace of mind, even conscience. All of it goes to the flea market. Perish our life, so long as these beloved beings of ours are happy. Ironically, though Dunya's decision to marry was for Raskolnikov's sake, it actually has the opposite effect on him. He so detests the idea of his sister sacrificing her life and her happiness for his, that it pushes him further towards the brink of depravity. He thinks his sister's marriage is no better than Sonya's prostitution. Quote, do you realize, Dunya, that Soncheka's lot is in no way worse than yours with Mr. Luzhin? Dunya and Luzhin's storyline reaches a tipping point after Raskolnikov is visited by Luzhin during his illness. Raskolnikov has already judged Luzhin to be a vile man. His theory supported by the fact that he did not pay for Dunya and her mother's trip to St. Petersburg, and has put them up in cheap, filthy accommodations unsuited for his future wife. During this visit, Raskolnikov is further irritated by Luzhin's arrogance and his need to boast his intelligence. Further, he reveals his vain individualism, claiming that, quote, everything in the world is based on self-interest, and that if one acts solely in self-interest, it will benefit everyone. It's kind of funny that this makes Raskolnikov angry because it sounds a whole lot like his theory of egoistic utilitarianism. Yeah, both of these characters have got some ego problems. Big time, big time. Raskolnikov has seen enough, and he chastises Luzhin for his impure motivations behind marrying Dunya, and kicks him out of his apartment. Luzhin becomes deeply offended and defiant, and makes yet another mistake in his anger. He sends a letter to Pulcheria Alexandrovna, saying that when they meet, Raskolnikov must not be present. He essentially forces Dunya to choose between her brother and himself, thinking that she's a meek woman who will do as she's told. Raskolnikov observes, quote, there is this one phrase, you will have only yourself to blame. Very significantly and clearly put, and then there is the threat that he will leave you at once if I come. The threat is the same as a threat to abandon you both if you disobey. Raskolnikov is further angered at Luzhin's insulting of Sonya, and points out that he lied in his letter, saying that Raskolnikov gave the 20 rubles for Marmeladov's funeral to Sonya rather than Katerina Ivanovna. Raskolnikov then makes the exact same threat, says that it's either him or Luzhin, so he's not entirely morally justified here. But importantly, Razumikin respects Dunya's decision, despite having voiced his contempt for Luzhin while drunk. So Dunya is put between a rock and a hard place, recognizing the red flags in her new husband, but still denying that she agreed to the marriage for her family's sake. She decides to give him a chance at their planned dinner, but gives him a little bit of a test by inviting Raskolnikov against his wishes. She asks Luzhin directly to prove that he values and respects her as his future wife, a test which he predictably fails. He says to her, quote, love for one's future companion, a future husband, ought to exceed the love for one's brother. And in any case, I am not to be placed on the same level. Luzhin's arguments and protests only dig himself into a deeper and deeper hole until he cannot reach the rim, and even hands the shovel up to Dunya, who then buries him with disgust, with assistance from her mother. Pulcheria Alexandrovna says, quote, you wrote to me as if it were an order. Should we really regard your every wish as an order? Luzhin then goes on to imply that Dunya is interested in accepting bribery from Svidrigailov, and this is the final straw for her. She kicks him out, pale with wrath and ashamed. Quote, Pyotr Petrovich was apparently not at all expecting such an outcome. He had relied too much on himself, on his power, on the helplessness of his victims. So Luzhin leaves with his tail between his legs, furious at this injustice and placing the blame solely on Raskolnikov, and seeks to discredit him and get himself back into the good graces of Pulcheria and Dunya, seeing their dispute as, quote, even quite remediable. So Luzhin develops a plan. He doesn't recognize that the true reason Dunya became offended was because of his rudeness and his insulting, haughty attitude. No, a woman couldn't possibly have original thoughts. They must be implanted by Raskolnikov, and bringing him down will solve everything. Luzhin's brilliant plan is to frame Sonya for theft, thereby lending credibility to his claim that she is a girl of notorious behavior. Well, Luzhin's plan tremendously, stupendously, if you will, backfires, as another character had seen him slip a 100-ruble note into Sonya's pocket, which Luzhin then discovered at Marmeladov's memorial meal. This is how Luzhin's character arc ends. We don't really see him at all for the rest of the story. He is disgraced by his own moral bankruptcy, left socially shamed with only himself to blame. He represents the dangers of thoughtless ambition, the inherent corruption in patriarchal thinking, and how superficiality and a thirst for wealth can never buy true happiness.
So, to recap, Dunya turned down two powerful and wealthy men who offered to elevate her status in society and pull her family out of poverty. She accepted one proposal out of love for Raskolnikov, but when the true character of Luzhin was revealed, she firmly denounced and rejected him. The other proposal she never considered, and she only met with Svidrigailov because of the blackmail. When this meeting escalated to threatening violence, Dunya stood firm in her strength and fortunately was released. In patriarchal 1800s Russia, one can imagine the mental fortitude and power it took to do both these things. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to call Dostoevsky a feminist based on Dunya's portrayal. I think that would be a step too far, somewhat of a mischaracterization, if you will. But that's really mostly because feminism at the time existed in the larger context of the social revolution in Russia, which Dostoevsky was decidedly opposed to, as we'll see in part 3 when we break down Razumikin. On top of this, his staunch faith as an Eastern Orthodox Christian lends itself to viewing women in sort of a one-dimensional role, as caretakers and wives. But Dunya's portrayal, as well as Sonya's, indicates a certain reverence for women and a recognition of issues of education and lack of economic opportunities for women.
Whether Dostoevsky intended this or not, both women work very well as a commentary, almost a satire, honestly, on the male-dominated culture that they live in. We seldom see things through their eyes, but through the eyes of men who have power over them. As Elizabeth Blake put it in her piece, Sonya, Silent No More, quote, "Indeed, she herself has no chance to define her own moral dilemma before her father, Raskolnikov, and Luzhin each take turns shaping their own images of her in order to fit her into their own stories." One might be tempted to point to this as evidence for Dostoevsky's female characters not being able to author themselves, but if you look at it in the context of 19th century Russia, Dostoevsky is just being realistic. Dunya and Sonya do have agency in their own stories, symbolized by Dunya standing up to Luzhin and Svidrigailov, and Sonya's rejection of her career as a prostitute, serving the desires of men. Harriet Murav, by the way, reaches the same conclusion in her piece in Reading Women in Dostoevsky. The characters of Sonya and Dunya are both archetypes of biblical women, self-sacrificial for the good of those that they love. Perhaps by today's standards, you might want something more, some greater independence from your female characters. But in Dostoevsky's worldview and the time that this was written, I think this is about the best you can ask for. And I do think it, indicates a respect for women. Further, I think that Dostoevsky holds women's intellect and aptitude to the highest esteem. Dunya's intelligence is lauded often. Not only that, but we see it in the way she speaks, with wit and a deep understanding of human nature. Sonya displays similar acuity and philosophical wisdom when she takes a more active role in debates with Raskolnikov. She shows him the truth behind his misguided notions of the world. And this moral and intellectual strength, even surpassing Raskolnikov, ultimately leads to his salvation. So there you have it. That is my Part 2 analysis of Dunya, Svidrigailov, and Luzhin. I hope you enjoyed. Part 3 is going to be looking at Razumikin, my favorite. I love that guy. Such a homie. As well as Katerina Ivanovna and the Marmeladovs. We're going to look at all sorts of stuff. Razumikin, I think, serves as like a philosophical protagonist. And the Marmeladovs... Okay, so the thing is, they're the two... It's not really related. There's not like a cohesive theme like the previous episodes. Disease is actually a common theme between the Marmeladovs. Alcoholism is a disease. Shame, self-pity, those can be called diseases. And then Katerina's pride and vanity are diseases. So that's kind of what part 3 is about. But let me know what you think in the comments. I really want to hear your guys' thoughts. And
yeah, this book is so good, dude. I'm obsessed. It's certainly a top 2 book that I've read this year. Number 1 being my favorite book of all time, The Dispossessed. So, and with time, who knows, maybe it could surpass that. But it's a really excellent book. Even though I don't agree with Dostoevsky's views on everything, that's okay. So that's it. I'm gonna go now, and oh my god, is that oh, it's just a deer. I thought I saw a moose. Maybe I can show you guys. Oh, there's 2 of them. Cool. What a way to end the video. All right. Oh, wow. This is going to be very zoomed in. Peace and love, and I'll see you next time, baby.